Welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern day spiritual paradise. I'm your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and a kid raised as a Jehovah's Witness throughout the 70s and 80s. As I always do, just a warning, there's some trigger points in each episode for those that might be on their journey out in most cases. Please note the sarcasm, humor, and experiences shared are simply my perspective and never meant to offend. As a 1980s kid, there are certain world events that really stand out in my memory. I could go down a long list of those that made an impression on me, but I was there when MTV launched. I know, and for the young people out there, they actually played music videos back in those days. I was there when Pac-Man, the video game, made its debut, and it was total insanity with us kids. And we were all very wowed by Michael Jackson's Thriller, both the song and the video. And on second thought, I often wonder if it was knowing that the king of pop was a Jehovah's Witness that made me start questioning a few things. You remember the video, maybe you can do the dance, I don't know. I remember watching the video actually with an elder who I was very close to, who lived right across the street from us. And even he was enamored. We'd never seen anything like this. Enamored by the Jehovah's Witness wearing his iconic red outfit, very worldly, dancing and singing about demons in a horror video. Who could forget it? But man, could Mike dance. Talk about your first exposure to cognitive dissonance. We couldn't even bring a pair of socks home from a garage sale for fear that the demons were living inside the socks. Remember those days? But here was Michael singing and dancing with demons and monsters. Man, times have changed. But historically speaking, the one event I remember everyone getting very excited about took place in July, of 1981. It's estimated that a global audience of 750 million people in 74 countries tuned in to their TVs to watch it. They declared it a public holiday in Britain, where 28.4 million people were watching on TV alone, with another 600,000 people lining the streets of London. It was my first exposure to how excited people get for anything that involves royalty. It was called a fairy tale and the wedding of the century, and if you were there, you likely remember all the buzz about it. My first big exposure to all things royalty was the wedding of Prince Charles to Lady Diana, and it really was a spectacle. If you didn't see it, let me tell you, it was big. You can see it online on YouTube and other places now. People were very emotional and gathering together to watch. They were having parties. Let's all get together and watch the wedding. All of it in the beautiful St. Paul's Cathedral there in the country. And it was apparent to me in that moment that royalty gets a lot of attention. For the record, I didn't watch the whole thing. No, I did not. Watching Princess Diana just walk down the aisle, I'm serious, it seemed like it took the better part of a century for her to get down that aisle in that dress. Look, I was 14. But with that event as my only exposure to all things royalty and royal events, I have to say right here and now that I felt a serious sense of disappointment with the November 2024 Governing Body Update number 7, hosted by future Heavenly King Garrett Loesch. As always, you can watch this big event by one of the 11 most important men on earth on Jesus' website at this very hour. Just go there and watch it. I can't confirm, but there's no evidence to suggest, at least to me, that 750 million people have watched this 16-minute, 18-second video hosted by a guy that will soon rub elbows with God himself, Jesus, Lazarus, Mary, or the Apostle Peter. Seems like kind of a big deal to me. But I can't imagine why 750 million people haven't tuned in. Mankind is only in the balance again today. And while I know 750 million people haven't tuned into Brother Loesch's wise words, it's even more puzzling as to why most Jehovah's Witnesses haven't even watched this update. That seems a little weird to me. Does that seem odd to anyone else? The 11 kings are speaking. Go ahead, as a Jehovah's Witness still speaking to you, approach one and ask them what they thought of the update of this episode. And wait for the inevitable, what update? Or, nah, I haven't seen it yet. I've been really busy. Because that is what you're likely to hear. When Jesus sends one of his favorite people to speak to the rest of us, I have to admit it continues to strike me as really weird that so few people, especially Jehovah's Witnesses, care to show up and watch. Let's be blunt for a minute. Princess Charles and Lady Di tying the knot isn't nearly as important as anything, and I do mean anything, that the governing body has to say to the rest of mankind. I mean, what if Garrett was announcing the date for Armageddon during this update? What if he was going to announce that we could all get tattoos to match our beards and pants during this update? What if he was going to shed light on who was going to study the Bible with Noah and inform him he couldn't be with Mrs. Noah ever again, despite all that he had ever done for all of mankind, including saving them? He couldn't be with her as a resurrected paradise dweller. Who wants to tell him? Maybe Garrett was going to share that. Or that somehow all the animals Noah can see in paradise got there without anyone having to build an ark like he did. They just walked in, somehow dodging earthquakes, volcanoes, fireballs, lightning, and some really good implements of destruction from guys like Stephen Lett. The animals just were able to dodge them. Who wants to tell Noah? Is Garrett going to let us know? Nah, doesn't matter. Any of it. Don't put on your thinking caps. I guarantee most everyday Jehovah's Witnesses won't know much about this governing body update as they continue their everyday lives as humble, obedient sheep, otherwise known as drowning in cognitive dissonance. All of these facts just add to my disappointment with these updates. I mean, when you're discussing everlasting life, it feels like these videos should be on par with the royal wedding of 1981. But alas, they aren't. Not at all. Nonetheless, rest assured and rest easy, I'm here to cover my version of the highlights from Governing Body Update number 7. The update was posted on November 8th to Jesus' website with the description, quote, "In this update, we will hear about our brothers around the world and enjoy an encouraging interview with new governing body members Jody Jedely and Jacob Rumpf," end quote. As I mentioned, this update is hosted by the illustrious Garrett Loesch, who seems to be kind of front and center as of late. It took me this long to realize that of all the governing body members, King Loesch actually looks the part. If you really look at him, he kind of looks the part of your classic late night TV talk show host, doesn't he? Kind of like a game show guy. He kind of looks like that. It's possible I haven't noticed it before, but the update begins with Brother Loesch casually sitting in a chair, looking into the camera like a modern day late night TV talk show host. Go see it. And I gotta tell you, I immediately started laughing. He looks a little stiff. He looks a little unnatural, but he's going to give us the classic TV talk show host pose. Eat your heart out, David Letterman or Jimmy Fallon. We got Garrett Loesch. This month's update begins with the Kingly one telling us that since the last update, they've had two more special conventions. Both of them were held in Chile, South America, where more than 4,700 delegates from 21 countries were in attendance. Couldn't have been cheap, was my first thought. He claims that there was a combined attendance peak of 17,000. And, well, the number we're all really looking for, if you were ever a Jehovah's Witness, with a whopping 123 people out of 17,000 were baptized, dedicated their lives there in Chile. And with that claim, I have to tell you, I sat back in my chair and did something I hate doing. Math. I hate math. That is one successful householder/Bible study number for every 138th Jehovah's Witness present that many decision that everything they've heard about Jehovah's Witnesses to this point, including these special conventions, inspired 123 people to get into a bathing suit and dedicate their life to the Watchtower Society. Scratch that, Jehovah. Scratch that, Yahweh of the Bible. Scratch that, L of the Bible. What a fantastic average. For every 138 Jehovah's Witnesses, they met somebody who wanted to study the Bible. But while that didn't impress me whatsoever, as I doubt it will you, I wanted to go a step further. What is the population of Chile, you ask? Well, since the conventions, two of them were held there, it's over 19 million people and growing with an annual growth rate of 1.2%. They're booming in Chile. So, with 123 people out of the potential 19 million precious lives just in Chile, I have to tell you, I wasn't that excited. I mean, is that exciting to you? If you're a Jehovah's Witness listening, you've got an annual convention, you've got two different versions of it, you've got a peak attendance of 17,000 in a country of 19 million, and 123 people got in the pool. Brother Loesch also said that there were delegates from 21 other countries in attendance. So scratch just the Chile numbers. There were people from 21 other parts of the world. But still, 123 people's souls. That's it. And look, I'm in no way saying that one soul is not of inestimable value. If you know me, you know I believe that. But look, Jesus called for two special conventions in Chile, and it only saved 123 people. Wow. I mean, his numbers aren't that much more impressive than Noah's. He got 8 on the ark. He got 8. They got 123. Not very impressive for an organization that says they're saving lives. In addition, I must also say that I was unable to confirm how many of the 123 newly baptized were actually just the children of current Jehovah's Witnesses, since that is where most of their baptisms come from these days. I can almost confirm, because I can't really confirm, but I got a pretty good idea that most of these people were family members and raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Most of us may remember that the preaching work used to be the identifying trait of Jehovah's true worshipers. And can you imagine all the books, all those magazines, those book carts, the wireless signals needed for the website, all in motion to get 123 people into a pool at an international convention? All of this is told to Jehovah's Witnesses as Jehovah's version of speeding things up as Armageddon approaches. From the Watchtower of 1985, March 1st, pages 17 through 22, the aptly titled series, Jehovah Speeds It Up. Under the subheading, Speeding It Up, we're told this, quote, Jehovah adds a third part to his promise. I, myself, you see, it's very personal, Jehovah shall speed it up in its own time. As we stand at the brink of the Great Tribulation, the time for this is now. 1985 is this quote, folks. The rapid acceleration of the kingdom work during the past 2 years bears this out. This speeding up is to be observed earthwide, even in lands where Jehovah's Witnesses must demonstrate their love for Jehovah God and Jesus Christ by preaching in the face of persecutions or other circumstances that endanger their very lives. With the ranks of the full-time publishers ever increasing, the pioneers are to the forefront. And what joy they find in Jehovah's service. End quote. I remember when David sent Bathsheba's husband to the forefront of the battle. That didn't end so well, never mind. But that was from 1985, just under 40 years ago. Jehovah's speeding it up. And at his international convention in Chile, according to Brother Loesch, they found 123 people. This was undoubtedly very exciting for the 123 people that got in the poll. After all, they're just like, well, I know, they're just like Noah. From the March 2023 March edition under the articles Baptism, How to Get Ready, these people, as well as many others, were told this from the faithful slave, quote, in a sense, we might compare the work you are doing now to prepare for baptism to the work of Noah and his family did for years to build the ark. What work do you need to do in order to get ready for baptism? End quote. So there you have it. You might think slipping into those board shorts or that one-piece modest bathing suit, must be modest, is no big deal, but think again. If you're one of these 123 people that Garrett's calling out, you are like Noah. And who doesn't want to be like my guy Noah? I've talked about him a lot here. He has the self-control of 1,000 men, not making babies for 500 years, making arks, gathering the animal kingdom, and living for a year in mountains and mountains of the entire animal kingdom's shit on his ark. It's an incredible journey. And side point, what a question, huh? You're like Noah, but what do you need to do to get ready for baptism? According to this article, you need to down some trees, you need to mix some tar, you need to capture an elephant. I mean, Noah did. Nope, we aren't told, but you're like Noah anyway, and so are these 123 innocent people now captured by the Watchtower Society and the governing body by means of baptism in Chile. Thanks for the update. Incidentally, and you knew I'd go on a tangent, you might remember that Noah wasn't asked to stand and answer 2 baptism questions. Remember that? No, it's not there. The second question, of course, being, quote, do you understand that your baptism identifies you as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in association with Jehovah's organization? End quote. Noah never had to answer that. But I guarantee you, the 123 people who ventured to Chile to get baptized did. No indication Noah was asked that question, but these people are just like him. He was likely just choking on the smells of all the animal kingdom shit mixed together on a floating box. But you, well, you're in Chile, and you're just like him. Thank you, Brother Loesch, for the update. As he glosses over the fact that 22 total nations were in attendance to see 123 people baptized, King Loesch then breaks into, you guessed it, as is common at the conventions, experiences. Here comes the comments no one can corroborate. from people no one can corroborate. I'm sure they're real, and you and I are to believe they're real. It reminds me, for the brothers out there who experience this, when the circuit overseer would call the elders throughout the circuit, he'd call around before the next circus assembly. That's what they were called back then. I guess they're regional conventions now. Got to change the name. Jesus needs an update. But the circuit overseer used to call around to the elders asking for encouraging experiences he could share from the stage at the next convention. No one who sat in that audience had a clue if any of these were real or not. But as an elder, you would relate to the circuit overseer. If he called you, you would relate to him some third-hand story you heard that only grew in its grandeur by the time you heard the circuit overseer repeat it from the stage as you sat in that audience at the assembly. You were like, wow, I told him he called on 10 people. He said he called on 50 people, and they all got baptized. It was something to behold. You would literally turn to your wife if you were one of those elders that got that call, and you would mouth, I didn't say that. But hell, it doesn't matter. It's a great story, right? Okay, I digress. Here is Brother Loesch's example from Governing Body Update, November 2024. He says he got it from a guy named Jonathan. Take his word for it. He says, quote, he said, the love that you have shown us on every step of this trip, from the welcome at the airport to all the different activities, the beautiful gifts, the friends at the convention, the wonderful reception personnel at the hotel. It has been unbelievable. We thank Jehovah for allowing us to have this incredible experience. End quote. Thank you. Heard it from Jonathan, just telling us what he heard. He continues by saying, quote, a delegate named Jessica said, thank you for giving us a preview of the new world. End quote. Thank you, Brother Loesch. Two experiences from people no one knows if they're real or not. But wow, a couple things stood out here. Two people, it was a preview of the new world where people will also be required to sit for 8 hours a day listening to boring speakers like they did at this convention, repeating the same things that these speakers have been saying for over a century. Is that what Forever in Paradise looks like? What a preview, because that was this convention. Minus, of course, stepping over all the dead bodies, including the people that you love, that you watched get killed by Garrett Loesch and his friends from heaven. They left that part out. That new world just can't get here soon enough. But once he isn't finished with the encouraging news, delivered in his classic monotone style, he continues by highlighting a favorite subject of Jehovah's Witnesses. Please go watch this. Natural disasters. When's the last time you ever got to go to a convention, regional assembly, whatever they're called now, and didn't get to hear about updates on natural disasters? When you're kings on your way to heaven, you put meteorologists and tectonic scientists and everybody else to shame. It's time for natural disaster update. Nothing proves to a Jehovah's Witness that they're in the right place like a natural disaster update. If a Jehovah's Witness experiences a mudslide or an earthquake, they see it as proof that Jesus invisibly took his heavenly throne in 1914. Oh, they sigh this. Oh, we had an earthquake. Oh, I can take a deep breath. I am in the truth. Jesus said this was going to happen when he became king. Everybody takes a big, deep breath and a sigh of relief. Brother Loesch, tell us what happened. Now that generations can overlap, a natural disaster in 2024 is a faith-strengthening event for Jehovah's Witnesses. Is that sick and twisted? The answer is a resounding yes. But it again proves to them, I'm in the right place. And so Brother Loesch is going to give an update via the governing body update on the most recent natural disasters earthwide. He continues by highlighting one. He says, quote, in mid-September, Storm Boris affected Central Europe, bringing heavy rain and powerful wind. Hundreds of our brothers and sisters were displaced and received relief aid. End quote. Listen, on a serious note, terrible news. This is really bad news. And I'm sincerely glad to hear that everyone's okay. My next question is, what was the aid? Who gave them the aid? Well, Garrett leaves that out. He doesn't say. We don't know how these people that were displaced by Storm Boris were aided. No details given. Just want you to know there was a natural disaster. And Jesus took the throne in 1914. Remember when he sat on the Mount of Olives and said to his apostles, there's going to be earthquakes and natural disasters. Brother Loesch leans into it. What the aid was and who was saved, not important. However, there is a montage of photographs showing flooded kingdom halls, because that's what's important, and mass destruction to neighborhoods. But he continues, quote, meanwhile, South Africa continues to be affected by unprecedented droughts. Various branch offices, including Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe, have helped tens of thousands of our brothers to have the food they need. He then relates, quote, Hurricanes Helene and Milton devastated the southeastern United States. Sadly, 3 publishers were killed. Over 11,000 of our brothers were displaced. The storms damaged or destroyed 17 kingdom halls and 2,500 of our brothers' homes. We continue to pray for all of our brothers affected by these disasters and are grateful for the volunteers supporting disaster relief. And of course, we also appreciate the donations that help us care for the needs of our brothers enduring these situations. End quote. I'll stop there. There is more, but you get the idea. These guys lean into the concept of natural disaster to build on the concept that Jesus took the throne in 1914. He talked about it on the Mount of Olives, and he now has us running things here on this earth. There's no details given, to how they aided these brothers, who these poor 3 publishers were that were killed in the disasters in the U.S., who's getting clean water for the countries in Africa, what's going on in Europe after Storm Boris, nothing. Just a couple of quick updates, and thank you to all the people that actually help others. It's not Garrett Loesch, nor his 10 friends. They just collect the money. Just a side point. Bad news in these updates means they have the good news. That's the point. And of course, your money helps us. It helps them. I've commented on all of this before a million times, and you sense the sarcasm, but it pales in comparison to what other people, including other religions, do for those enduring tragedy or those in need around the world. Jehovah's Witnesses are not very good at it. I'm not saying they don't help others. I'm not saying they don't help their own. They do, primarily. But all of it runs through the 11 guys in upstate New York. And they decide what the aid is. They decide what happens next. And we don't even get to learn the names of those who passed away. But Brother Loesch continues. He then talks about a raid in Eritrea, including the arrests of children and an 85-year-old sister who is still, at the time of this broadcast, sitting in a prison cell. That's right. Brother Loesch is on camera trying to offer up some encouraging stories, just like he always does. But then he highlights how many of this 85-year-old woman and her kids and her grandkids are sitting in prisons as they loyally serve Jehovah. If you're not familiar with where Eritrea is on the map, it's in eastern Africa, just across from Saudi Arabia. He lists more people in prison, and then he says, we continue to pray for the 223 people around the world in prison for their faith. End quote. And that's it. He's done. Not a word more. I'm still trying to recover from the image that's in the video of the 85-year-old sister that's rotting in a prison, including 2 more generations of her family. I'm trying to recover from that, but he then goes on to say there's 223 more people sitting in prisons for us, for them. Just a few headlines on the 223 people, precious souls, including women, children, and elderly people rotting in prisons around the earth for a publishing real estate company in upstate New York of the United States. Where do we go with this? Did you notice what the governing body is, quote, doing for them? Brother Loesch says, well, he and his 10 friends are praying for them. They're praying for them as they sit in prison cells. Best wishes, best wishes. They're praying for these people? Got to tell you, got pissed. Their commitment to being victims is only supported by this type of crap. And they aren't personally the victims. It's other innocent people associated with Jehovah's Witnesses. Innocent people giving up their lives for nothing. Nothing. For a cult. 223 people in prisons for this organization. It is deeply disturbing. And what's most disturbing to me, well, that's not true. What is equally disturbing to me is that this is a throwaway comment in Governing Body Update number 7, November 2024, and it isn't even known or will be ignored by Jehovah's Witnesses living in Western lands, where they will leave watching this video, get in their cars and go to Starbucks, or maybe go get a massage. Meanwhile, wonderful, clearly high character, highly devoted, loyal people, 223 of them to be exact, are sitting in prison cells at this very hour, all in loyalty to these 11 men. Children? Yep. An 85-year-old woman? Yep. Please go watch this and see the kind of shape, because they show her, that this poor 85-year-old sister is in. I've got an honest question here. How do these men sleep at night? How do they rest their head on their pillow and not think of the 223 people, including this sister they name on video, who is clearly very fragile and very old, sitting in prison cells while they're on the upstate compound resort-like facility that people like her built? How do these men and Jehovah's Witnesses watching this, yep, everyone's going under the bus here, including myself, who thinks something should be done, how do they sleep at night? He simply says they'll pray for these people. You'll pray for them? Like you did thanking Jehovah for the food on the table there at Wallkill? You'll pray for these people. That's it? An organization that has billions of dollars, that has a massive legal team, and real estate executives, as you'll soon learn, people with experience in negotiations, And no one, not one person, is trying to get these 223 people free from prison, Brother Loesch. Not one. This is beyond disgusting. I have no words for this. And it's a blip in Governing Body Update number 7. He throws it out there. You see a picture of her. My mouth fell to the desktop. I felt tears coming to my eyes. And this guy says, hey, we'll keep praying for him. That's it. Behold, the shepherds and leaders of Jehovah's earthly organization, as an old woman and all that comes with being elderly and female, sits in a prison cell, joined by 222 others around the world for this publishing company. Sick. But the best is yet to come in this Governing Body Update. If you thought I'd related some of the fun stuff, I guess I did, but it's about to get better. King Priest Garrett Loesch continues with the following, and it's truly the meat of this entire update. Quote, at the annual meeting on October 5th, 2024, there was a very exciting announcement. They freed the 223 people from prison? Nope, that wasn't the exciting announcement. Don't get excited, folks. He continues, quote, Brothers Jody Jedely and Jacob Rumpf were appointed to serve as members of the governing body. We are happy to have them here with us in this studio, not a prison cell, a studio. Let's spend a few minutes getting better acquainted with them, end quote. This is right on the heels of people in prison. This is right on the heels of almost no one getting baptized. Meet the two new kings. And it's the meat of the entire update. It takes 10 minutes of the 16. We're going to meet the two new kings. I sat there thinking, wait, that's it? That's it. No more information on the 85-year-old sister sitting in prison in Eritrea. Does she need anything? How is her health? Does she need medicine? Is she scared? What are you men doing for her and all of those in prison today? What are you doing for these people? No, that's it, folks. And you really know, and somebody who's broken free, you see the cognitive dissonance, because frankly, we used to be some of those people. We thought these were neat experiences as elders in public talks. We'd get up and read these from the yearbook and have the audience crying, trust in Jehovah. Then we'd go and have lunch with someone at Applebee's. I mean, it was insane that we didn't put any thought to what these people are going through. It's nothing more than an FYI for Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you're keeping track of what they do to people's brains in this update, we've got worldwide conventions. Everyone loved them. They were so fun, and we got gifts, and everybody loved us. 123 people got in the pool. Everybody's being persecuted, just like Jesus said, and we got natural disasters. See, we're the one true religion. That's the message. That's it. A woman approaching 90 years old, along with other women, children, and countless men, are in prison. Prayers up. We say prayers for them. Let's move along. Let's talk about our two new governing body members. They live on the resort compound, and they ate a fresh breakfast this morning, cooked and served to them by some young guys that can now be 18 years old that volunteered for free labor, followed by a walk around the lake out back. Let's meet the two guys that got to do that today. Would you like to know more about them? Nice segue, Brother Loesch. Nice. Actually, I'd like to know more about that poor woman. But I know you're done with her now. Story's been told. So let's move on in this update and meet the two new king priests. Are you ready? I'll never get used to this stuff. I couldn't stand this when I was a Jehovah's Witness. It's sick. People truly don't matter. She didn't matter. The 222 other people don't matter. They don't matter. They're throwaway stories at the beginning of this governing body update. But these two new guys, well, they matter. These guys are very important. No word yet on who appointed them, how they were appointed. Did an angel appear in Wallkill? What happened? Nope. Let's meet our two new kings. And with that, the camera pans out, and seated across from David Letterman, scratch that, Garrett Loesch, are the two new guys preparing for a life in heaven. We're about to get our first official introduction to the two new kings. Garrett continues with, quote, "Welcome, brothers. We have so many questions we would like to ask you," end quote. We sure do. Oh boy. Can someone else conduct the interview with these two? We have a boatload of questions. My first one at the moment would be, what are you going to do to get that 85-year-old sister out of prison? Nothing? Okay, you're going to pray for her? Gosh, two new sets of prayers up to heaven from you two. How about the questions? For example, considering you two are in your 50s, here's the first thing that I thought when you see these guys on video. Considering you two are in your 50s, at what exact moment in your life did you realize that you no longer had any interest in living on Earth? You could easily give up your wife and float away to the cosmos, but that you had a yearning to live as an invisible, genderless spirit creature up there in the sky. Can you share with us, since you're so young, you're in your 50s, want to emphasize that, can you share with us the moment that the tidal wave of emotions came over you when you realized, no, I want to go up there? Let me ask you this, you two guys sitting here, these two new kings, was it anywhere, I don't know, around, how about 1995, while you two were in your 20s? You were in your 20s. So was I, incidentally. Were you singing along to Coolio and the Gangster's Paradise that year? It was the #1 song like the rest of us. If this moment was in 1995 that you two realized at that young age that you were going to heaven and you were going to have a future as a king priest up there with Jesus, how did you feel about this? The Watchtower of 1995, February 15th, page 19, which says, quote, "Logically, the calling of the little flock would draw to a close when the number was nearing completion. And the evidence is that the general gathering of these specially blessed ones ended in 1935, end quote." Wait a minute. Wait. Brother Gently and Brother Rump are sitting on this stage. You're interviewing them, Brother Loesch. They were in their 20s in 1995. Wait, they weren't born in 1935. What's going on here? The governing body they obeyed when they were young men, then you're... It's just incredible that they obeyed and were taught to believe in. They started this reference in 1995 by saying, quote, "logically." Logically? So we don't need logic anymore, apparently, in 2024, because, well, these guys, the two new kings we're being introduced to, were born 30 plus years after you claim the heavenly invitation was closed. And you say you had evidence of it. You guys just told us that this was closed in 1935. In 1995, when the two guys you're introducing us to were in their 20s. And if you think that isn't bad enough, and remember, both of these guys grew up as Jehovah's Witnesses and were hearing all of this stuff. So again, when did you realize you were going to be an invisible genderless king? When? Because just 12 years later, they said this, the Watchtower of 2007, May 1st, pages 30 through 31, said this, quote, "On the other hand, as time has gone by, Some Christians baptized after 1935 have had witness borne to them that they have the heavenly hope. Thus, it appears that we cannot set a specific date for when the calling of Christians to the heavenly hope ends. End quote. Wait a minute. Wait. The reference in 1995 that these two new kings were reading and studying said that you had evidence and that it was logical, that it all ended in 1935. Just 12 years later, you're saying, we don't really know. What happened to the evidence? What happened to the logic? We don't need that anymore. Shut that part of your brain down. We're going to spend the next 10 minutes getting to know these two fine gentlemen, these new kings. But if you think, while watching this governing body update, that Brother Loesch or anyone is going to ask these type of deeper questions for those of us who like our brains, think again. We got two new kings, and there is no need to point out that millions of Jehovah's Witnesses were told that they were nuts and had mental problems if they thought that they too were going to heaven. They were told they're crazy. That was done in 1935. But in 2007, they lost the evidence and the logic they claimed. It's gone. It just never gets old. Because we got two guys in their 50s sitting on the stage. It's truly one of the most damning proofs for anyone who has a brain synapses firing that this is all made up. It's a man-made cult. And I'd love to hear from you if you're someone that left based on this. I would love to hear some comments because this is so damning. I would seriously love to know if anyone was so blown away by this fact that it was one of the reasons they found the exit door from this religion. Because for years, anyone that claimed after 1935 that they were going to heaven, they were part of the anointed, the 144,000, they were told they had mental problems, that there was evidence proving it. And then suddenly, without explanation, kind of like generations overlapping, guys in their 50s are now becoming kings to rub elbows with Jesus in heaven in 2024. It's incredible. We gloss over it, we make jokes, but make no mistake, this is damning. But Garrett continues, quote, "Maybe you could help us to know a little bit about how you first came to love Jehovah. First, what helped you come to know Jehovah so you wanted to serve him?" End quote. In my opinion, the answers that follow from these two are damning proof of where most Jehovah's Witnesses come from today. Garrett calls first on Jody Jedely, who answers his question like this, quote, "I was raised in the truth. Dad was baptized in the 1940s, and he served faithfully until he passed away. And Mom was baptized in the 1950s. They loved Jehovah and his organization. Their love for Jehovah helped my sister and I form a love for Jehovah as well." End quote. We are one king deep in this interview, and already we learn that he was indoctrinated as a child inside this organization, that he was born into it. It might be the most common Jehovah's Witness story. Most of those inside Jehovah's Witnesses today, or that are hanging on, were born into it. They never had any kind of a choice. They never learned critical thinking, especially if they're baptized at a young age, as a minor, as most of them are. It's in print in their library. And isn't it fascinating? I couldn't help but think, I'll bet that conversation with Dad would have went odd, huh? "Hey, Pops, You're going to live on paradise, and I'll actually be in control of resurrecting you from the heavens. Stay faithful. I wouldn't want to have to kill you from up there. Look, this is their doctrine, folks. You don't have to stray far to start thinking about what the implications of this are. A guy in his 50s is king in heaven, and now on earth, part of the governing body. But he continues, quote, as I grew up and learned the truth just made sense, end quote. And I have to tell you, I needed a laugh, and at this point, I started laughing. And I thought and said, alone in my own room as I watched, how so, Jody? How did the truth make sense? Seriously, what made sense? He is literally my age, and I need to know what he thinks made sense. The religion he and I, again, same age, grew up on is long gone. It is done, dude. The cheese danishes are gone. The Shasta sodas are gone. They're gone. So please explain. When he was growing up, the generation of 1914 was never going to see death before we all got into paradise. When he and I were growing up, you weren't allowed to consider yourself anointed. No way, no how. It was a one-way trip to the B school and a meeting with the elders. But here he is. Here he is. He's a king now and anointed. Does that make sense too, Jody? What about all the old people in his local congregation that watched Jody Jettley growing up in the Kingdom Hall, giving his first talk, probably a Bible reading, and getting the nerve to talk at his first door in field service? And those old folks are watching on now. Here he is in 2024, a member of the governing body, on track to be a king priest with the real Jesus Christ in heaven. Does it make sense to them too, those old folks who watched you grow up? Who watched you when you had pimples during puberty? Does it still make sense that Jerusalem's destruction in 586, sorry, scratch that, I mean 607 BCE, that's a lie, not true, was all pointing toward a publishing company in the not yet discovered United States of America? Does that make sense to you, Jody? Really? It made sense to you that Michael Jackson could film Thriller, but the rest of us Jehovah's Witnesses were told we shouldn't even watch it? It's not even close to the same religion that he and I grew up in. We're the same age. So which part made so much sense, Jody? Which part? That Noah's Ark really does picture the organization? That Satan runs the planet because Jehovah lets him? That invisible angels are hovering overhead, having the same amount of failure in the preaching work as we do? Or was it the talking snakes, the burning bushes, or John's revelation that you made into a book explaining how the Bible's last entry is all about your organization? Which one makes more sense? Today's Jehovah's Witness version or the Jehovah's Witness version of the religion you and I grew up in, Jody? Which part? It's so damning to watch these men speak. And insulting, frankly. But I eagerly anticipated King Losh's follow-up questions. But well, as you might imagine, I was disappointed as usual. He says, quote, but what really convinced me it was the best way of living was the love among Jehovah's people, end quote. He goes on to say that other Jehovah's Witnesses working unassigned territory near them really made an impression on him and that they were like instant family. I'm sure it's a lot like spending several hours a day standing next to a book cart with another person in 2024. The bond forms itself. We're bonding here. And while this is actually a subject near and dear to my heart, I'm just going to keep it simple. If there was one thing that helped me leave the organization, to walk out and never look back and honestly never shed a tear for all the people and everything I lost, it was the obvious lack of love among Jehovah's Witnesses, Jody. You say it's what drew you. It's literally what pushed me out the door. And I'm not referring to the shunning arrangement. I'm talking about something that is so obviously missing. Genuine love for each other, for their neighbors. It isn't there. You see it early. And again, Jody, I grew up in it like you did. You can feel it. You know it's missing. The lack of honor, character, and love that elders show towards people. It was glaring to me. It was that omission that made me take a much closer look at the entire religion. He's claiming it's what's making him a king. Whether it was the gossiping, the lying, the ambition, the neglect of the elderly, the neglect of single parents and the fatherless kids, or those suffering with mental illness or depression, or those who had no money, you could see that love was missing and is missing. Need an example? Look at Brother Loesch during this interview and ask him how the 85-year-old sister is doing in a prison cell. Look, there is love among Jehovah's Witnesses. I try to be balanced. There's good people. Otherwise, I wouldn't talk about it. There are wonderful, loving people that take loving others very seriously. It's true. But the organization as a whole, the organization itself, no way. And they gave a glaring example within minutes of Brother Jedley saying what drew him to being a king priest is all the love among Jehovah's people. Even as he sat across from Garrett Loesch learning that 223 people are in prison around the world. But he's going to say a prayer for them. So loving. For anyone curious, this is how Jehovah's Witnesses define love. And it's clear King Priest Jedley bought into the subliminal suggestions of the 1980s when he and I were kids together, just as I did. From the Watchtower of March 1st, 1989, March 1st, page 3 says, quote, "In fact, as a group, they are the most privileged, the most successful, and by far the happiest group on earth today, as you will see in the next article," end quote. These types of absurd statements, something that is not measurable, you can't hook something up to a machine, you're the most loving people on earth, you're the most happy people on earth, isn't possible. These kinds of things are littered throughout the Watchtower publications in the 80s and 90s. And as is human nature, they were extrapolated to include JWs as the most loving people on earth. Why, you ask? Because they would take time to knock on your door, hand you a watchtower that might save you from the invisible God that currently has you marked for death at Armageddon. That's love to them. Via this interview, they keep that very same messaging going. Now from the mouth of a newly appointed king priest and governing body member, Jody Jedley. But next up is newly appointed king priest Jacob Rumpf. We don't want to leave him out. What can we learn about him in this interview? He shares, quote, "My parents were raised around the truth. However, my mother was inactive, and as I was growing up, my father was also not a witness. Although we were never associated with the congregation, my mother did teach us basic Bible truths. I knew that God's name was Jehovah. I knew I should only pray to him, and I also knew that the earth would be converted into a paradise," end quote. And I wanted to yell, "Jacob, run, run," when I heard that initially he was free of the weekly indoctrination schedule as a little guy. But it was too late. His parents, who were also indoctrinated as kids, notice they were all raised around it, let their belief system bleed into their son Jacob. And here he is now, a member of the governing body. This is so common with inactive Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way. They still live in fear. Or they will tell you, well, it's the truth, but they just don't do anything about it. They don't go to meetings. They're just inactive. I know there's probably an acronym for that. One of the strangest things I've ever seen, and something that I personally chalked up to when I observed it, to people actually knowing at a subconscious level that it's not really the truth. but the fear-mongering stuck to him somehow. And as we can see, Jacob, who is now a member of the governing body, is telling us that it stuck to him as a kid. He goes on to relate that it was his faithful J-Dub grandmother that inspired him to take a Bible study at 13 years old. And there it is again, a kid. It's really what stuck out to me about these interviews with both men. Both of these guys grew up roughly at the same time I did, literally the same generation, and they got them captured young. It's interesting that one was in a classic J-Dub family that took part in all the ministerial activities and privileges like seldom work territory, while the other came from a home with weak Jehovah's Witnesses who had a matriarch, the grandmother, that was obedient. But both landed on the thrones, albeit in different ways. Jody Jedley goes on to relate that he spent summer vacation auxiliary pioneering, something that Jesus suddenly changed, but it doesn't seem to dawn on King Jody in the moment. Does that exist anymore? He talks about his family visiting Bethel during the summers. He graduated high school, pioneered, and went to Bethel. The classic Jehovah's Witness trajectory we were told to pursue as teenage boys during the 80s. He's a living example. He started in the cleaning department and tells us in the interview, quote, "It was a great crew and we enjoyed working together," end quote, because there is nothing like cleaning toilets with your bros. He goes on and on with his many privileges, including helping with medical matters for the organization. But the interesting part for Brother Jedley is that he and his wife left Bethel in 2005 to take care of parents, or so he tells us. And here is where this king priest story gets really interesting to me. He says they returned 8 years later. He goes on to discuss bouncing around to the different locations in the organization that Jesus built on the planet, all of which will survive Armageddon, apparently. Doesn't dawn on him. He was involved in construction and hospital services during the past few years. But he leaves out some significant details that many have uncovered. And I know that shocks you. Apparently it wasn't going to make it into the interview from Brother Loesch. Evidently, one of their favorite words, I like using it, during his 8-year absence from the temple, Brother Jedley did something unthinkable. He got an education, and he became a real estate executive. How do we know this? You can find out with one Google search. A person can find his video, as well as references to ownership executive roles in Tierra Bella Realty, a residential agency in North Carolina, and Touchstone International, interesting, huh? Properties, which is said to be, quote, an independent, locally owned real estate firm located in Charlotte, and that has, quote, worked with a large number of international clientele, end quote. Oddly, Brother Loesch doesn't ask him about this in the interview, and he doesn't even offer it. We've got an 8-year gap. It's kind of like Jesus when he was a kid. They didn't know where their own kid was. He was at the temple. They found him, and then boom, skips ahead. He's getting baptized by John the Baptist in the Bible. We just have a gap. It's very much reminiscent of Jesus in the Bible. 8 years. But I guess the fact that Brother Jedley has worked in construction leadership roles, nor his online video where he desperately encourages people to become a Jehovah's Witness and avoid eternal destruction. Sorry, scratch that. I was wrong. I misspoke. Oh, wait. Actually, the video you can view yourself features him encouraging people to become a CCIM, which stands for Certified Commercial Investment Member. He highlights all the benefits of this title, including why someone should be investing in this system of things. It's on video. Invest in this system of things. King Jody Jedley. He continues by saying in the video, quote, "In order to obtain this designation, one has to complete both a rigorous education component as well as real life experience," end quote. Wait a minute. King Jedli, those 8 years away from the world headquarters, otherwise known as the Temple or Noah's Ark, really changed you. Did you just encourage a career in this system of things on video? Did you just encourage people to get, quote, a rigorous education, end quote? Yeah, it's on video. And Brother Loesch just leaves the 8-year gap out of the conversation. What a shock. This guy who said these things is now part of the same 11 men who tell the rest of Jehovah's Witnesses this. From the Kingdom Ministry of October 2011, page 3, we are told, quote, "Are we encouraging young ones who are often steered by school teachers and others to pursue the world's higher education, to set spiritual goals instead and pursue the highest education, divine education?" End quote. Does that quote ring a bell, Jody? I've got you on video telling me to become an investor, to get a rigorous education, to invest in this system of things. I grew up the same time you did, Jody. How about this one from the Watchtower of April 15th, 2006, page 27, quote, "Do you not agree that to continue enjoying divine blessings, we must resist seeking things for ourselves at the expense of Jehovah's worship?" I don't know, Jody said it was a rigorous education. Back to the quote, "That is so whether the activity or interest diverting our attention is the pursuit of wealth, get-rich-quick schemes, ambitious plans for advanced education to have a desirable career, CCIM, in this system, or programs of personal fulfillment," end quote. Wow. Folks, your new king. During those 8 years away from Jesus' earthly throne when he was, quote, taking care of parents, Brother Jedli seemed to forget that the governing body has been condemning higher education and pursuing careers in a dying world. They've been discouraging that for well over a century. He grew up in the 80s like I did. We weren't allowed to go to college. They have entire publications dedicated to discouraging careers and education. But well, look, folks, as of the time of this video, you're not supposed to ask questions. It doesn't apply to this guy. And now they have a king with years of worldly experience in the real estate industry, international real estate, serving on the governing body. Isn't that something? Remember that apostle that Jesus had pushing investment opportunities in real estate in Jerusalem? Remember that guy? The Apostle Chad? No, you don't remember him? But pay no attention. I'm sure they can now use his skill set somewhere, right? I wonder where. International real estate investing. The lack of self-awareness in these guys is staggering. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this interview, you should be insulted. They're trolling you at this point. He just got appointed to the highest position in the universe by breaking the counsel of the governing body. But if you're a young Jehovah's Witness listening, don't you worry. King Jedli will surely be giving talks soon discouraging you from focusing on a rigorous education or making any decent money with a career. He will likely dive into the Watchtower library and quote things like this from his generation that never overlaps. The Watchtower of 1986, August 1st, page 29, the article, Is your young child growing to salvation? I might add an article his parents likely studied with him. Quote, career goals should be talked about early. While school counselors will hold out one kind of a career, Christian parents can stress goals that will satisfy the child's growing interest in serving Jehovah, such as pioneering, Bethel, and missionary service, end quote. I didn't see CCIM or investment real estate executive mentioned. That's from the Watchtower of 86. All of this is true, of course, unless you have your eye on a future throne where you will literally judge those of us that had a college education and a career, and maybe even judge us as worthy of a fireball, even though you did the same damn thing. These guys have grown so entertaining, and in my opinion, they are literally calculated hypocrites at this point. Or are they just really stupid, dumb? It's possible. This guy is the guy judging you and me. Fascinating. And with stuff like this in this governing body update, I'm at the point where I believe the governing body now is trolling Jehovah's Witnesses. When they have their meeting weekly, I believe it's on Tuesdays, they get in the room and they bust a gut laughing that they can pull this kind of stuff over on millions of people. But the interview switches to future king priest Rumpf, Jacob Rumpf. He goes on to say he was inspired by a 1998 talk at the regional convention regarding countries in need of preachers. He personally fell in love with Ecuador. He said a prayer. He investigated the country. He wrote the branch. And look at that. He landed in Ecuador. He relates that Ecuadorians were searching for truth, and he even met his wife there. He goes on to become a circuit overseer. He went into the Amazon rainforest with magazines. He then goes to Gilead. He travels the world several stops. But what he wants to emphasize is that Jehovah's Witnesses need to be content and stop being anxious about anything. He relates that he loves all the people he's met through the years. He seems, in my opinion at least, to be a meek, likable guy. He looks like the classic older Jehovah's Witness guy. The guys that I grew up with, looking up to. He looks like him. I saw his archetype, his personality in many old friends that I've left behind years ago. And this guy is the guy that I'd probably be drawn to if I was a witness. Why? Because he seems to be really invested and bought in to the spiritual side of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I got to say right now, I predict Jacob Rumpf will likely be a fairly quiet member of the governing body. He looks like he's kind of Kenneth Cook, that guy. But I'm going to also say right now that I think Jody Jettley is another matter. Real estate investment executives tend to have certain personality traits. And it comes through here as he interviews these two men at the governing body update. Both men do what all of us young men were brainwashed to do into doing during the 80s and 90s. As the interview continues, and I gotta say I was laughing so hard at this point. They literally do what we young teenage guys were taught and conditioned to do in the 80s. They compare themselves to faithful men of old in the Old Testament. It wasn't okay to like Indiana Jones. It was perfectly okay to love King David. I started laughing so loud. It's painfully obvious what they do to young men at a very early age in the organization. And as crazy as it sounds, they plant these thoughts in young guys' heads by means of things like the Bible Stories book, dramas, videos. You remember? It is truly a psychology for boys, warriors and conquerors, the stuff little boys dream of from a young age. as you might imagine, neither say they're inspired by the apostles, neither of them, who were just fishermen. Those guys didn't get their attention, even though they're in the New Testament. All they did was, fish. Neither of them was inspired by Jesus, who incidentally was celibate and healed people and loved kids. No, neither of them say that's who they're inspired by in this interview, because swords and spears and war and leveling cities and fire and destruction is so much cooler, man. It's so much cooler. I can relate to this and expose myself here because I know what they're thinking. I was raised like they were in that org. That stuff's so much cooler. Jody Jedley says the example of Joshua is what inspires him. You don't say, Jody. I don't remember him investing in real estate. I remember him wiping out a lot of real estate. I can't imagine why, though. You've just been handed a crown to serve with Jesus, Chuck Russell, and the Apostle Paul in heaven. But you really love, of all people in the Bible, Joshua? You see, I've read that book, Jody, and well, I gotta admit, it's definitely entertaining. It captures interest. Let's see. What are some of the highlights about our guy Joshua, the man Jody Jedley, new member of the governing body, is inspired by? How about this from Joshua? They killed the inhabitants of Jericho. Then they killed all 12,000 people in Ai. Afterwards, they impaled 5 kings on large poles. That must have looked neat. And killed everyone in Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Gezer, Eglon, Hebron, Deber, Hazar. They burnt that one down with fire. The hill country and the entire area. It's estimated that Joshua, the guy that inspires Jody Jedley, possibly wiped out 80,000 people. Wiped them out with swords and spears and fire and stuff. It sounds a lot like a genocide, doesn't it? But if you're looking for inspired words from the guy that inspires your new governing body member, how about Joshua 6:20 and 21 of the New World Translation, which tells us this, quote, "After that, the people went up into the city, each one straight ahead, and they captured the city. They devoted all that was in the city to destruction by the sword, man and woman, young and old, bull, sheep, and donkey." End quote. Joshua, ladies and gentlemen. The same guy that inspires your new governing body member was sure to slaughter old people and women and little fuzzy animals because, he had to and stuff. That's the guy that inspires Jody Jedley. There are so many more details about Joshua, but just know the guy now appointed to judge the rest of us in heaven is a big fan and says he's inspired by Joshua to take on his new assignment. And to that I say, I bet he is. I'll bet he is. He gets to resurrect Joshua, ask him a few questions even though he'll be invisible, and then go on a killing spree, much like the guy that inspired him. However, if you're an educated real estate investor, he may look the other way when he gets his fireballs going, so consider that. Maybe you should get into real estate. He'll have mercy on us. Oh, man. Then it's Jacob Rumpf's turn with Brother Loesch. He, too, is inspired by a Bible character. His choice isn't one of the apostles, again, just fishermen, or Paul. He just made tents. It's so boring. His favorite guy is Gideon. And I found his choice very telling. It told me so much about him as a man. And almost obvious. You see, the Bible tells us that Gideon was shocked by his assignment. I'm guessing Brother Rumpf is like, why are you choosing me to be on the governing body? He was shocked because he believed himself to be weak and timid. He came from the weakest family among the people and from the smallest tribe in Israel. I guess you could say it was mock humility or humility. His dad, by the way, much like Brother Rumps, was kind of inactive. In fact, he was worshiping idols. Gideon's dad. Interesting, huh? Interesting that he chose Gideon. So much in common with him. And I got to say, Jacob Rumps seems like a quiet guy. He sees himself in Gideon and his family. And I thought it was an interesting choice. And of course, we all had the Bible Stories book. It was Gideon that didn't believe Jehovah wanted him. So he had the fleece turn wet overnight. Remember the story? Then he chose his fellow soldiers by how they drank water, whether they were looking around for the bad guys or not. But no big deal, because Gideon also went on to blow some horns and break some pots. Oh, and also Gideon slaughtered all the bad guys, the Midianites. Remember the story? Even quiet guys who come from troubled, inactive JW families can lead a slaughter. They can lead a slaughter. Where could all of this be going with the two new kings in this interview? Unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. I want to say here, there's more that a thinking person could glean from Governing Body Update number 7, November 2024, but I'm going to encourage you to watch it and you be the judge. It all comes off like a whimper to me, just a wet blanket. This Governing Body Update is obviously centered around putting faces to the names of the two new governing body members in New York. They're going to roll them out on stage for talks soon. Here they are, get to know them. Incidentally, as usual, we didn't meet their wives. They threw in how everyone loved the convention in Chile and really did the 223 people locked up in prisons who can't even watch this update a real solid by saying that they would say a prayer for them. Thanks for the help, guys. But in the end, this entire episode was dedicated to the introduction of two new kings and two new men who will become genderless and visible guys, judge us and know your every thought. I don't know why I always feel let down by these updates. I saw the buildup for the royal wedding, as I mentioned at the outset in 1981, and trust me, it was really highly anticipated. But here we have Jesus scanning the planet Earth and sending the Holy Spirit and maybe a few invisible angels to inspire the 9 members of the governing body to appoint 2 new kings who literally have our lives in their hands. And well, all we get is a 16-minute video buried on the website under the global news page. The world tends to be so curious and hyped to meet royalty, learn what they look like and how they're going to lead us. But this whole thing with the 2 new guys and the stuff before it, it's barely a whimper. And it's not like it isn't a big deal. I mean, even the angels have to be curious who their 2 new bosses are going to be. From Insight Book Volume 1, pages 1133, the article Holy Ones says this, quote, "The Apostle Paul states that the Holy Ones will judge the world as well as angels, evidently sharing in the execution of judgment on wicked ones." End quote. With the November governing body update, we didn't get the names of the 223 souls rotting in prisons around the world, but we did get the brief bios of 2 new kings. One is a former real estate investor who believes in rigorous education and owned a business. The other, a guy who loved his grandmother and used to hike the Amazon rainforest, placing Watchtower magazines. They're both in their 50s. Generations now overlap. No update from the heavens on when the end will be here. But here are the 2 new guys that will judge the rest of us. How you feeling after the update? I want to thank you for joining me this week. Wherever you may be well.